Hello crafty friends, and welcome to my next video. In this video I'm going to be creating crepe paper carnation using Sizzix products. So using their crepe paper as well as the dies that they've specifically made to use with their crepe paper. If you've never made a crepe paper flower before, that is fine. This is a really simple flower, easy to do. I'll go through some of the steps I did in order to make this flower. I've never made a carnation before, so you'll be going through this for the first time with me as well as the first time I'm using Sizzix Crepe paper products. So I purchased 2 die sets. We're going to be using, like I said, the carnation. Here is their crepe paper. I do want to make a couple of notes about crepe paper before we get into the flower. First thing I want to note is the size. So when you get this package, each roll is 12 inches by 24 inches. Now a regular roll of crepe paper that I get, the Italian, is 19.7 by 98.4 inches, and I converted that from centimeters. So you can see it's a pretty big difference. But again, with the Sizzix, that 12 by 24 is per roll, and with this package you do get multiple colors, and I believe they have 3 or 4 different packages with various colors. So for the money, it's not bad. I can't complain for what it costs. This was $19.99 USD. Now the other point I want to make about crepe paper is the stretch. I do want to review the stretch on crepe paper, a quick blurb about the grain on crepe paper and what it's for. Because again, if this is the first time you're creating a crepe paper flower, there are some things you need to know about the grain and how it stretches. I'm also going to be doing a quick comparison between Sizzix Crepe paper and Italian crepe paper. Sizzix Crepe paper is Chinese made, and then there's Italian crepe paper as well as German crepe paper. So when I say Italian, Chinese, or German, that's really just the country of origin. Okay, so you can see here I have some large rolls of the Italian crepe paper. In my opinion, Italian crepe paper, and I'm not going to name the company because I would butcher it, Italian crepe paper really is the best. Now I did mention German crepe paper, which is Leah Griffith crepe paper. I won't be including this in the demonstration of the crepe and stretch. I'm only going to be talking about the Chinese as well as the Italian. Now the Italian is the 3 on the left and the Chinese are the 2 on the right. And the reason there's 3 Italians there is because there's different weights. This is a 90-gram crepe paper. So you can see that I am stretching it and it pulls apart. So it's got a ton of stretch. And again, point of crepe paper is to stretch and mold the paper to your will, which makes them great for flower making. Next crepe paper I have is 140 gram. Again, this is Italian. Pretty decent stretch and much sturdier than the 90 gram because it is a heavier weight. I have a few rolls of this, but it's not a crepe paper I use very often. Now the next Italian crepe paper is 180 gram crepe paper. So it's quite heavy, lots of stretch. You can use these for the smaller flowers and get a decent result. I don't use them too much anymore for the smaller flowers, but definitely use them for the large flowers. All right, so this blue piece of paper is Chinese, and I apologize, I got distracted when writing Chinese and I wrote Chine. Anyways, back to the crepe paper. Again, Chinese crepe paper, lots of pull. I do compare the weight to about 140 of the Italian, maybe a little less. Now I'm pulling out another piece of Chinese crepe paper because the one thing I want to mention is not all Chinese crepe paper is equal. It's just not. This orange piece will actually have slightly less stretch and even feels a little lighter than the blue. Now, Chinese crepe paper still works on making flowers, still has good stretch, but the quality isn't quite as good as the Italian, but will still work in your flower making. Now here I've got a piece of the Sizzix, and I'm going to stretch it, and I do apologize for going off camera, but you can see I found it very similar to the blue Chinese crepe paper. Lots of stretch, not stress, lots of stretch, similar to the 140 gram Italian, and I'm just going to do another stretch here. And that is with the grain. So you'll notice when I stretch, the grain is the lines going up and down. And you want to make sure that your petals, your leaves, that grain goes up and down, top to bottom. Because when you stretch, you're going to want to pull it apart. And that's what, see there, I'm pulling it apart. That's what cups the paper to give you that flower petal look. I've also linked the video here that goes into a bit more detail with the types of crepe papers as well as flower examples. So as I said earlier, I'm going to be using the Carnation die. Now I'm going to be using all the dies except for that single petal die. And I'll be honest, I didn't think I would have a use for it, so I really just didn't use it. Now I'll be using this dark color of crepe paper. The reason I'm using this dark color is because it's not a color I actually go for very often. And if this didn't work out, I didn't want to waste the colors that I do go for. So I'm using the dark. Nothing wrong with the color, it's just not really my go-to color. You'll notice as I'm cutting my crepe paper to get it ready to put through my die machine, I've got my grain going up and down on the petals. Now I've also stretched out the crepe paper a little bit, not too much, not all the way, just because I know I'm not going to be doing a lot of stretching with these petals. Now I also tried using my magic mat to die cut these petals. It didn't work out very well. I am going to give it one more try. You can see I have to bring my scissors in to cut the inlaid pieces. And I'm just doing a quick stretch, just checking out what this is going to look like. Now I'm going to give it another try, put it through. I wanted to see if it was me or not, but I think what it is that the crepe paper is just too soft for the mat and to cut all the way through. So again, I tried a second time. I'm still having to cut out the inlay pieces and really work to get those out. So I would not recommend the magic mat. I do like the magic mat. I use it almost all the time, but it's just not going to work for this scenario. So I do pull out my hard plate and I'm going to give this another try. And you'll see once I get it off here, much better, no problem. Die cut right through the crepe paper, no issues, much better. So I don't recommend using the magic mat on crepe paper. Definitely use a hard cutting plate. Now, altogether, I've got 43 petals here. You can see some single ones there. I'm not going to use those. I meant to, but forgot to attach them to the center, and they just didn't look right on the outside. Now, I wanted to show you how much crepe paper I have left after cutting out those petals. Not much. Again, we're going back to that size. So when you do get this crepe paper, if you're just starting out, I kind of recommend doing the same thing I did. Use a color that you likely aren't going to go for your practice. Okay. Now, I do cut my stem in half. I only do that for my videos just because I can't stay in camera range with a large stem. It keeps hitting the table. You'll also notice I hooked my stem. If I'm able to hook the crepe paper on the stem, I definitely will do that. I've had flower buds fall off my stems. It happens, unfortunately, so if I can hook, I will definitely hook. Now we're going to go into a little bit of stretching here. I'm not doing a lot of stretching. You can see I'm doing the same thing I did with the crepe paper during our assessment earlier. But what I'm doing is I'm stretching every second petal, and then I'm flipping that strip around and stretching the remaining petals, and then I'm doing a quick stretch at the tip of the petal. It's up to you. Doesn't have to be perfect. As I always say in my crepe paper videos, crepe paper flowers are very forgiving. So we'll get started and put on some petals. Now you'll notice some of those strips only have 3 or 4 petals. That's just because I was doing using the remaining crepe paper that I cut off after my stretch. Now for this crepe paper flower, I will be using hot glue. I'm a huge fan of hot glue. I like how quickly it sets. Not necessarily, it doesn't really dry, it just sets. And as I wrap these petals, I'm wrapping them very loosely, and then I'm crimping the base of the petals together as I attach them to the stem. And I will do this, I believe, for the first, and you can kind of play around with this. I do this at least for the first 2 strips that I adhere to the stem. After the first 2 strips, I still wrap the strips loosely around the stem. I just don't pinch the base of those petals as much as I did. Again, play around with it, see what works for you. I'm really, again, just winging this. This is the first time I've made a carnation. This is the first time I have used Sizzix dyes. First time I've used any dyes to make a crepe paper flower or any crepe paper product, really. And it's something I've always thought about, even using the dyes I have in my stamp sets, especially the leaf dyes, would probably work pretty well. Again, just not something I've tried. It's not high on my priority list at this moment. I do enjoy making crepe paper flowers, but I usually end up making my own templates. I'm going to throw some music on, and I will be back when we start to adhere the greenery to the stem. All right, so we're gonna add the sepal to the flower. Now, I used hot glue, like I said, to create this flower. One of the things I didn't keep in mind though was that hot glue can add a lot of bulk to your crepe paper flower. So what I'm seeing here is that I've got a very large base and it's too big, and I know that, but I'm going to keep going. I'm going to complete the flower. I will show you another flower where I used a tacky glue. Now that's what I'm using right here. Tacky glue, this is not the same glue I use for my card making, nor do I use my card making glue for my crepe paper flowers. I do keep those separate. Tacky glue is really, I find it's a little too moist. I know, terrible word to use in the video, but I find it's just a little too watery. How about I say that? So I don't use it on my card making, but it works great for crepe paper flowers, and it's a fairly inexpensive glue that you can pretty much find anywhere. So I wrapped the base, and you'll see that I've got the sepal going up all the way almost to the top of my petals. Again, this is my first time. It's probably a little too high. Once the flower is sculpted, it will be fine. Now I've also cut strips of crepe paper. Again, grain going up and down when I cut these strips, so I can stretch it as I wrap my sepal. And as I'm wrapping my sepal, I will move down to the stem and I will completely wrap the stem. I am going to stop right here though, and I'm going to cut out my leaves because there is a leaf die, and there's 2 to 4 leaves per stem on carnation flowers. Now for this flower, I'll only be using 2. And I will run this through my little machine a few times to make sure I've got a good cut, and I do. Now, of course, you can also stretch your leaves and mold them with the crepe and the grain. A reminder, you want the grain to go up and down on your leaves as well as your petals. Now, when I wrap, I really just hold the strip of crepe paper in my left hand and twist the stem with my right. I should note I am left-handed, so do whatever is comfortable for you. Once my flower is put together, I will go back in, mold my leaves, mold my petals. Because the die cut keeps the petals together at the bottom and the top, I did separate the top parts of the petals on some of the outside strips. Now my only issue with this flower is that base. That's my only issue with this. Other than that, I think it turned out great. I think it looks wonderful. I do apologize for the darkness of the color. I didn't think it would be that difficult to see on camera. Now off camera, I did make another one. I used tacky glue to do it. I used a nice light pink, and I came in with some dye ink and a blending brush and just added a little bit more pink to the tips. Again, on the outer strips, I cut, or I should say separated the petals at the top. I do think on this flower, I should have added a couple of extra strips of petals because they're bunched together a little bit more in the center, and that's just from using the liquid glue instead of the hot glue. So you can see the difference here between the two. I did add 2 extra leaves to the pink flower. I think it looks way cuter, and there's quite a bit of difference at the base of the flower. I mean in size. So it definitely looks better on my second flower. It's a lot less bulk, and it's not so gigantuous. It is so huge on that first flower. As someone who's been making crepe paper flowers for 9 years, I'm actually quite impressed with how these worked out. Considering it's my first time ever making a carnation, I think these worked out really well, and I am going to be trying some more in the future.